Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We are going to be diving deep into the terminology of electrochemistry by looking at its fundamental opposites. So whether you're reviewing for your B.Sc Semester 5 major chemistry exams or you're just a highly focused learner, eager to understand the hidden forces that power our modern world, you are totally in the right place. Oh, and before we really get going, a massive thank you to Mythal Sir for putting the foundations of this explainer together. If you enjoy this, please make sure to like and don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel at I am Electrode. All right, let's jump right into the chemistry of opposites.
So, here is our quick mental roadmap for today's session. We'll be hitting 1. Electrochemical cell types. 2. Demystifying anode and cathode. 3. The vital salt bridge. 4. Measuring cell potential. 5. The Nernst Equation. And finally, 6. Real-world applications. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Electrochemical cell types. Okay, let's dive into this by looking at the very first major dichotomy in the electrochemical world.
You know, it's a pretty simple question, right? Where does the energy in the device you're probably using right now actually come from? Well, the answer is hiding inside a miniature, highly controlled chemical environment. To really understand how we harness that energy, we have to look at the two primary ways chemical reactions and electricity actually interact with each other.
And this brings us to our first set of opposites. On the left, we have the galvanic cell, which you might also know as a voltaic cell. This is the powerhouse. It relies entirely on a spontaneous chemical reaction. Because the reaction happens naturally on its own, it releases energy, basically converting chemical energy directly into electrical energy. So when your phone is running, a galvanic cell is doing the heavy lifting. On the right, though, we have the exact opposite, the electrolytic cell. This one relies on a non-spontaneous reaction. It is not going to happen on its own. Instead, it literally requires an external electrical power supply to force the chemical reaction to happen, converting electrical energy back into chemical energy. Basically, one gives you electricity and the other consumes it.
Section 2. Demystifying anode and cathode. All right, now that we've got the cell types down, let's break down the actual physical components where these reactions take place.
Pretty much everything here centers around the electrode. An electrode is, quite simply, a conductor that establishes electrical contact with a non-metallic part of a circuit, like your electrolyte solution. It's essentially the doorway for electric current. What's actually kind of cool about this is the history. The specific terms we use for these doorways, anode and cathode, were coined all the way back in 1834 by the polymath William Whewell, who was actually consulting with the legendary Michael Faraday. They pulled the terms from Greek, focusing on the descent or the way down of the current's path.
Okay, I need you to pay super close attention to this table because it clears up a massive, and I mean massive, common pitfall for chemistry students. Look at the charges. In a galvanic cell, the anode is conventionally negative and the cathode is positive. But look what happens in an electrolytic cell. Those charges entirely flip. The anode becomes positive and the cathode becomes negative. Why? Because the power source is actively driving the electrons in reverse. But check out that final column. This right here is your anchor. No matter what kind of cell you are looking at, oxidation always happens at the anode and reduction always happens at the cathode. If you can lock that into your memory, you'll never get confused by those changing plus and minus signs on your exams again.
Section 3. The vital salt bridge. So we have our two half cells with their respective electrodes, right? But they can't work in isolation. Let's meet the unsung hero that actually brings them together.
Enter the salt bridge. Physically speaking, it's often just a U-shaped glass tube or maybe a piece of filter paper that's been soaked in an inert, strong electrolyte, something like potassium chloride or potassium nitrate. This salt bridge physically connects the two separate half cells. But here is the absolutely critical distinction. The purpose of a salt bridge is not to move electrons. The wire handles the electrons. The salt bridge is there strictly to maintain electrical neutrality within those solutions.
Let's actually walk through exactly how this mechanical flow works, step by step. Step 1. As oxidation happens over at the anode, let's say a zinc bar is losing electrons, positive zinc ions flood into the solution. Simultaneously, the cathode is consuming positive ions. If nothing stepped in, one beaker would become massively positive and the other massively negative. Step 2. To stop this, the salt bridge springs into action. Negative ions, like nitrate or chloride, flow from the salt bridge directly into the anode compartment to balance out that positive buildup. Step 3. Electrical neutrality is beautifully restored. If we didn't have the salt bridge, the opposing voltages from those charged solutions would just immediately cancel out the electrode voltage. The whole reaction would choke, and absolutely zero electricity would be produced.
Section 4. Measuring cell potential. Let's move on and see how this builds from qualitative definitions of parts into quantitative, hard measurements.
Obviously, we need a way to measure the pulling power of these cells, so we use the standard electrode potential, which we call E0. This is the potential difference between an electrode and its electrolyte, strictly measured under perfect textbook conditions. So that's exactly 298 Kelvin, 1 atmosphere of pressure, and a 1 molar concentration. Because we can only measure differences and not absolute potentials, chemists assign the standard hydrogen electrode a potential of exactly 0, and basically just measure everything else against it.
Once you actually have those standard values, calculating the overall potential of your cell is wonderfully simple. The standard cell potential, or electromotive force, equals the standard reduction potential of the cathode minus the standard reduction potential of the anode. It's measured in volts, and it perfectly quantifies the electrical driving force of your spontaneous reaction.
Section 5. The Nernst Equation. But, as we all know, there's a catch. Real life is messy. You are very rarely going to operate a cell at exactly 1 molar concentration or perfect standard temperatures. We need a reliable way to calculate potential in non-standard states. And this is exactly where we introduce one of the most elegant formulas in all of electrochemistry, the Nernst Equation. This equation lets us find the actual cell potential under any conditions by adjusting that standard cell potential. It perfectly links the electrical potential directly to the temperature and the current reaction quotient.
Let's isolate the variables here really quick. We've got the standard potential, the gas constant R, the temperature T, Faraday's constant F, and the reaction quotient Q, which is just your ratio of products to reactants. So the totally crucial point is right here in the middle, N. That's the number of electrons transferred in the balanced redox reaction. Miscalculating N, usually because of an improperly balanced chemical equation, is literally one of the most frequent and costly mistakes students make on their exams. If you don't know exactly how many electrons are moving, your entire Nernst calculation just falls apart. Always balance your redox reactions first.
Section 6. Real-world applications. All right, let's bring all of this academic theory and mathematics back down to reality. How do these electrochemical concepts actually power, and sometimes degrade, the world around us? When we group these cells together into batteries, we generally categorize them into 2 main types. Primary cells are what you think of as your standard single-use batteries, like the AA dry cells in your TV remote. They have a high internal resistance, and their chemical reaction is completely irreversible. Once they're dead, they're dead. Secondary cells, on the other hand, are reversible. Think of the lithium-ion batteries in our phones and laptops. They have low internal resistance, and when you plug them into the wall, you are actually using external electricity to force that chemical reaction backward. You're temporarily turning your galvanic cell into an electrolytic cell just to recharge it.
But electrochemistry isn't always helpful, right? Sometimes it's highly destructive. Take corrosion, for example. When a single drop of water lands on a piece of bare iron, it doesn't just sit there. It literally acts as a miniature voltaic cell. The iron surface becomes the anode, giving up its electrons, and the edge of the water droplet acts as the cathode, reducing oxygen from the air. The result? That refined metal is gradually oxidized and destroyed, forming iron oxide, which we all know as rust. It is a relentless, non-stop electrochemical process.
Now, swinging back to the highly beneficial side of the spectrum, we have fuel cells. Unlike batteries that eventually just run out of stored chemicals, fuel cells are continuous energy generators. They convert hydrogen and oxygen directly into electricity. What is uniquely fascinating about them is the proton exchange membrane, or PEM. Instead of a traditional salt bridge flowing with heavy ions, the PEM specifically allows positively charged hydrogen protons to pass right through from anode to cathode. They are incredibly efficient, sometimes up to 85% in cogeneration setups, and get this, the only waste products they emit are heat and pure water.
Which really brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with today. As our world desperately seeks out sustainable, clean energy solutions, the answers aren't just out there in massive wind turbines or giant solar grids. Could mastering these microscopic electrochemical processes, perfecting the fuel cell, developing way better secondary batteries, and controlling corrosion, be the actual key to our macro survival? It's a fascinating field with incredibly high stakes. Thank you so much for joining me for this breakdown of cell terminology, and once again, a huge shout out to Mittel Sir for making this explainer possible. If you like this content and found it valuable for your studies, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at I Am Mittel Rathod. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.